went to school for engineering and was really on that path of checking all the boxes. Early on as a child, I bought into the story that if you check all the right boxes, if you do all the right things, accomplish all the things that you're supposed to, quote unquote, then that is kind of the surefire formula for happiness. Realized pretty quickly, like, wait a second, I'm checking all these boxes and I'm really miserable inside. So there's got to be a different path to happiness. And so in my mid 20s, started asking myself those questions. What do I want? What makes me happy? And that really set me on this path to awakening, to healing. And I've been healing ever since.
All right, welcome everyone to the One Moment Podcast. I am your boy and your co-host, Kevin Odom. I am part of the mental health substance use field. I am a licensed mental health counselor, a licensed addiction specialist, and a certified clinical supervisor, but only in the state of North Carolina. Now, let me preface this, okay? I have to, because this is very important. What we do on the podcast is we talk about mental health, substance use, suicide prevention, and anything related to the healthcare field. We never give medical, clinical, or professional advice on here. Today, we're going to be talking about some pretty heavy stuff. And so if you are triggered by watching this, please stop the recording if need be. You have 988, which is the National Suicide Crisis Hotline. You also have NAMI, which is the National Association of Mental Illness. You also have SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse Mental Health Services Administration. You also have 911, and you have local emergency departments and local crisis centers. So please feel free to seek help if you're in therapy. Call your therapist up if you need to. Call your psychiatrist. Call somebody up. Seek help immediately if need be. All right. I cannot stress that enough. And if we talk about anything that might be triggering during this, we're going to try to do our best to give a trigger warning. I'm not going to promise anything. We are human. And so everybody knows when we're in conversation, we're just conversing. So we have today's special episode. We have a very amazing young lady, and we were talking, and I really was just, I could have carried on for another 2 hours without the recording. I mean, I was intrigued with hearing her story, getting to know her a little bit. And of course, she had to ask me some questions. And, listen, it's all about building relationships with people, right? Miss Carissa, how are you
Yes.
doing?
I am doing so well, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me. I am sitting outside enjoying the sunshine. So if you hear some birds in the background or some airplanes, I'll do my best to mute. But just so you know, we might be accompanied by some backup singers and some friends of nature.
Hey, that is fine. That sounds like it's a crow or there's crows around you. And if that be the case, interesting fact here, okay, or interesting thought here. Crows are my animal spirit. So that
Amazing.
tells
So
me
we've
we're
got your
supposed
spirit
to be
animal right here.
right, right. So that tells me we're supposed to be doing this at this moment.
Amazing. I love
100%.
that.
Absolutely. Oh man. So tell us a little bit about you. Like, where are you from? What do you currently do for a living? Kind of give us a little bit of a history. I know I was talking to you, but for the audience that don't know you, um, are you a musician? Are you an author? What do you do for a living? What is your professional life? Where do you currently reside at? Things like that you feel like would be critical for the audience to know.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the opportunity in the space. I think my story is an interesting one. I moved around a lot growing up, and everybody's first question is, oh, were you a military brat? No, I was not. My mom just moved around a lot. So I was born in Hawaii and then lived there till I was 3, but then moved around the mainland US quite a bit growing up, and then spent close to 20 years in North Carolina, actually. So not too far from you. And then I spent about 5 years in Colorado. And for the last year, I've been fully nomadic, traveling around the world. And I'm getting ready to settle in Hawaii again. So funny how we kind of come full circle in our stories. But, it's been a really wandering path. I went to school for engineering and was really on that path of checking all the boxes. I think early on as a child, I bought into the story that if you check all the right boxes, if you do all the right things, accomplish all the things that you're supposed to, quote unquote, supposed to do, then that is kind of the surefire formula for happiness. I got married in my early 20s, growing up in the South, that's what's expected of women, especially. Got married and, was doing my best to make that first marriage work and realized pretty quickly, like, wait a second, I'm checking all these boxes and I'm really miserable inside. So there's got to be a different path to happiness. And so in my mid 20s, that's when I started checking into, well, what is it that I want? For the first time, I started asking myself those questions. What do I want? What makes me happy? And that really set me on this path to awakening, to healing. And I've been healing ever since. But I met my second husband at age 30 and we got married. And then I went into, after a few years, a very deep depression. So it was, I was telling you earlier, but I think it's really interesting. It was actually a form of what's called double depression. My therapist told me that I had a form of low grade functional depression that usually results from childhood trauma called dysthymia. So basically, I was mildly depressed, but didn't know it because I thought that was just life. And then I got major depression on top of that. And so that really sent me into a very dark spiral. This is a trigger warning in terms of my background. I did experience some suicidal ideation and went through some really dark times, but happy to dive a little bit more and unpack that because I did not make that decision. I did not choose that path and instead clawed my way out of the darkness and actually learned how to, I like to say, alchemize. If you think about alchemy and turning lead into gold, I really alchemized a lot of that darkness, a lot of my shadow, the parts that I was most ashamed of in myself, and turned those into some of my greatest strengths and my breadcrumbs back to joy, back to happiness, back to life. So I've gone through a lot of my own mental health struggles. I've had anxiety, burnout, was in the corporate arena for over a decade and then did corporate consulting. And now I am an entrepreneur. So I actually have two startups. So it's been quite a winding path. Happy to unpack any of those directions that sound interesting or you think might resonate. But yeah, I guess that's the nutshell version.
Yeah, that is a nutshell version for sure. I am just sitting over here baffled because entrepreneur times two, and I say times two, I don't know really what the correct word is, right? Woman who grew up very, sounds like traditional, uh, and cultural, right? As far as like the status quo of what women should do or what women do and how they should live and how they should make decisions and things like that. And then really stepping out in your 20s and making that decision like, well, society has said this, but what if that's not what I want? And it's interesting that you share that because similarly, I was in my early 20s when I started questioning those societal teachings, right? And I say societal, I mean like what society, family, everything teaches you. And I started breaking that shell and being my own self. And so I guess let's kind of start there, right? Because I think that's very important because society tells us that we have to do this, we have to be this, we have to think this, we have to believe this, we have to say this, we have to live this way, we have to do this. Women don't do these types of jobs, women don't do these types of careers, men don't do this, men do this, men don't cry. And then depending on the family history and the cultural background, women don't cry if you want to be a strong woman. So let's kind of unpack some of that because I think that's a big part. I work with so many women who struggle with that, right? Struggle with everything there. And so tell me, when did you feel like, or what was that transition like for you when you started to peel that onion back on yourself and you're saying, okay, hold on. Society has told me this, but what if I never really wanted that? Yeah, I want to start there.
Yeah, I think it's a great place to start. I think what's really interesting when we think about societal or cultural conditioning and the idea that we're supposed to be one way or not this other way, I started to get really curious and I said, well, who said? Like who's the authority? Who's making me believe these things? And I think there's a really interesting question of who benefits from me believing this. And so that really started this kind of path of inquiry where I started to zoom out layer by layer and starting to look at, okay, well, here's my role in society, but who defined that role and why and how does it make society run the way that it does? There's a joke that I love that really illustrates this point. There are these two fish swimming together in the water. You might have heard this one, but one fish looks at the other and says, the water's kind of cold today, isn't it? And the other fish looks at him confused and says, what's water? And I really love that joke because I think it really illustrates that if we're just going through autopilot or going by default, taking in what our parents, our faith leaders, our teachers, whatever authority figure we grow up respecting, if we just go by default and do what we're told and check those boxes, then we don't necessarily wake up to the water that we're swimming in. And that can be really difficult to do, especially when we live in a world that is designed for you, right? If you live in a body or an identity or a culture that isn't necessarily aligned to where you're growing up and where you're living, it's a little bit easier to recognize these things, but there are often times where we need to stop and we need to say, "Wait a second. What's going on here?" And so that's really that path of curiosity, that thread that I started pulling on and saying, "Well, who benefits?" And I started doing a lot of reading about neuroscience, understanding how the brain works, understanding, okay, we have this cultural conditioning and it serves a purpose, right? Because we are community creatures. Our evolutionary advantage is the fact that we collaborate, that we work together, that we live in community with each other. And so it's not about eradicating these tendencies that we have, but it's about getting curious and finding that tipping point where it serves me up to a point. And then if I let it go unchecked, if I let the pendulum swing too far, it no longer serves me. So, thinking about community and fitting in and belonging, right? We're wired, literally wired in our brains to need community because that's how we survive as a species. But when we allow that desire for fitting in to override that authentic voice inside of us, that's when it starts to go a little too far. So I started unraveling, leaning into the complexity of myself because I recognize that I'm not just one thing or two things. I am a multifaceted individual. I challenge the status quo. I align to the status quo in a multitude of different ways. So when I started leaning into my complexity and being okay with it, being okay with the fact that I don't fit any particular mold because I am a Carissa shaped mold and no other mold will fit me, that's what really started. Started finding those breadcrumbs to joy and to authenticity because I was no longer trying to fit into someone else's version of what I was supposed to be.
I love it. I absolutely love it. And where do you feel like if you go back, right, to your early 20s and even prior to that, where do you feel like you got these set standards on like what women should do and what you had to do and what you had to be, what you had to think and things like that?
I think it's from every single angle I can think of. I think some of it is from, let's say, teachers who taught me I'm rewarded if I show up a certain way, I'm punished if I show up a different way. And so I think there are overt clues like that. I think it comes from really well meaning individuals like our parents, our authority figures, our grandparents, whoever it might be. But I think what our parents want to do is help us to be successful, to succeed in the world. And so we take these programs, these ideas of how we're supposed to be. And I would venture a guess and say the vast majority of parents aren't sitting there consciously thinking, I want to deprive my children of their authentic expression because I want them to fit into what society tells them to be. That's not the thought process. The thought process is I want my kids to have the best chance possible at being successful, at succeeding in the world. How do I offer them that best chance? And it's this idea of teaching the rules of the road, right? Women should or shouldn't be this way, men should or shouldn't be this way, because when we look around at us at what's rewarded or what's punished, we say, okay, certain behaviors are okay and certain behaviors aren't. So I think a lot of it is really well intentioned. And then you couple that with, as a child, if you look at childhood psychological development, we go through phases, let's say as toddlers, where we are the center of our universe. That is a necessary part of our growth as a human being. And so if something bad happens in our life at that particular stage, we do internalize that and we say, it's my fault. So therefore, if I don't want this bad thing to happen again, I can't behave in that way. If I upset a parent or a caregiver or someone whose love I really depended on for survival, then we start writing our own stories. I use the analogy of a computer program, right? As toddlers, we're literally writing our computer code for our brain about how to operate in order to be successful, in order to find belonging, in order to survive. And oftentimes we don't upgrade that code. And so as we grow into adulthood, we're operating on these programs that often have bugs that weren't written perfectly and were written by a toddler or a child. And so I believe it's a beautiful gift and opportunity that we have to start to get curious about where those stories came from, why we believe them, and start to upgrade that operating system and that code that we're using because it might have served us in childhood. It might have helped us survive, especially if we had traumatic childhoods, if we lived in a home that wasn't safe, then we start to feel comfortable in an unsafe environment. So then as an adult, when we want to create safety, when we want to regulate our nervous system, it can actually be very uncomfortable to be in a safe environment because that's not what we're familiar with. So oftentimes when we say our comfort zone, I actually rebrand that and I say it's our zone of familiarity because what's familiar might be very uncomfortable. So I think it's a lot of these subtle, overt, and explicit influences coupled with our writing our own programs as children that lead to kind of the outfits that we wear, the masks that we wear as adults, trying to fit in, trying to find belonging, and ultimately love.
Kind of like conditioning, and think about behaviorism, and I think about how we are like animals where we go through life living a certain way of life for certain, in certain circumstances, certain experiences. And so the idea is we have to teach an old dog new tricks. And that's how we start really, I think, and this is kind of what I've picked up from what you were saying is if I want to start being authentic, right? If I want to start being authentic, I have to teach myself new things. I have to do things differently because the media will tell us certain things that we have to believe. We have political influences, we have historical influences, we have people in authority that tell us certain things, and yet, what do we truly believe internally? And I think that part is missing, not just on the individual level, but think about on a even a global level.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. For me, I think if you listen to a lot of new age advice, it can be portrayed as this, oh, just let go of what doesn't serve you anymore, just be authentic. And I have found in my own personal experience that those types of narratives that oversimplify or don't give credit to the deeply ingrained programs that prevent us from being authentic, that prevent us from doing the thing that we want to do, I find that those narratives can actually be really harmful rather than helpful. Because for me, it really was about getting curious. If I want to be authentic, okay, that sounds like a great idea, but I need to get curious about when did I stop being authentic? What made me think that I shouldn't be authentic in order to fit in or to find belonging? And so for me, not to say that this works for everybody, but for me personally, it was really about pulling on the threads of armor that I created that prevented me from being authentic. And as I started to understand, okay, I can take off this layer of armor because it's not serving me, it's really heavy, it's hard to carry. I needed to really figure out how to dismantle those things that kept me from being authentic before I felt safe enough to allow my authentic self to come forward. And so I think oftentimes we can oversimplify it and not give credit to the fact that our egos, which a lot of people say, oh, our ego is terrible. We need to dismantle our ego. Our ego is the enemy. Our ego is designed to keep us safe, right? It's designed to keep us alive more than it is designed to keep us happy. So I think that can be a really beautiful thread to pull on to say, how is my ego keeping me safe by playing small, by self abandoning and prioritizing other people's needs over mine? So there's a lot of really rich material if we can step away from judgment of it into curiosity.
I teach about in my clinical practice self-imposed limitations. Now you can come up with whatever terminology you want to use, and I'm sure you can look at any great clinical theory and it'll tell you whatever term you want to use for it. But at the simplest level of self-imposed limitations is that we are limiting ourselves because of those things that we learn at a young age, because of what society tells us, because of what our parents, grandparents, siblings, authority figures, media, politics, I mean, all of this stuff, because it's, we take what they say and we just live up to it, right? And these are the ideals of people around me and what I've learned, what people have said to me. And so I help people to start, like, let's take those self-imposed limitations away, and the sky is not the limit, right? We can, and of course, figuratively here. Yeah, I mean, I can't, go to outer space, of course, without having the appropriate technology and equipment. But reality is that's exactly what you've done. So my question is, and let me preface this. Let me preface my question first. For many people, it is very difficult, extremely difficult to start peeling the onion back and or living authentically. I say that so I can ask you this. Was it hard for you, or was it difficult for you to start peeling that onion back to start living authentically? Because, and I asked that numerous reasons. A, you're a female, and B, we live in a society where if you are a male, that's probably, it's a patriarchal society that we reside in. So that's why I asked that.
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. Thank you for taking an interest, especially as someone who, I don't mean to presume, but identifies as male, yeah, I think it has been really difficult. I think for me, what was really interesting is for a very, very long time, I was deeply embodied in my masculine. And so, we can talk about gender or sex, we can talk about males and females, but I also like to talk about masculine versus feminine energy, which I believe we all have, right? Both masculine and feminine energy. And because of the society we live in, I got clues early on that, oh, if I'm more masculine, if I'm more action oriented, more cognitive oriented, as opposed to somatically or intuitively oriented, this is how I get rewarded. And so for a long time, especially in my late 20s, all through my 20s, and even into my early 30s, I was amassing a lot of knowledge because I believed that cognitive knowledge that lives in our head, that's what's king. That's what matters, right? If I understand an idea, then that's all that there is. And so for me, there were some minor challenges in that as I started looking in the mirror, as I started looking at what was holding me back, those self-imposed limitations. But I think, Kevin, what was really, really difficult was the reckoning when I was, and this may be a trigger warning for some, so I'll preface it with that, when I was really in the depths of my darkness, in my depression, seeing that the thing that is creating this darkness is me. It is inside of me because I was so up against this idea of I'm not fulfilling the roles I'm quote unquote supposed to fulfill. I don't fit in to the ways that I've been expected to embody and to behave in the world. And so that led to a lot of really deeply shameful beliefs about, I'm incompetent, I'm not good enough, I don't deserve to be here. That's what led um, a lot of my suicidal ideation was this belief that I don't deserve the oxygen that I'm breathing, that I was so far away from being good enough or who I was supposed to be. Truly, what led me to where I am today. I had a very good friend who died by suicide a few years ago, and the realization that I had in watching her family grieve for her was suicide doesn't actually end pain. It only transfers our pain to the people that we care about most. And so in that moment, I can feel emotion coming up. So you might see some of that, but I think for me it's something that's deeply meaningful to me. In that moment, that was a turning point because I knew that I didn't want to transfer the pain that I was feeling onto anybody that I really loved or cared about. And so I made a decision. I said, no one's coming to save me. So somehow I have to figure out how to save myself. I have to figure out how to claw myself out of the darkness. And it was when I could truly embody and feel compassion and gratitude for those stories, those self imposed limitations, where I felt, not just knew, but felt. It was those limitations that actually helped me survive childhood. Because in the environment that I grew up in, it wasn't okay to be completely authentic. It wasn't okay to speak my mind. I had to prioritize my caregivers, safety and their opinion and their experience over mine. So this pattern of self-abandonment that I developed actually was a survival mechanism. And so for me, when I was able to embody that compassion and that gratitude for my younger self, that was the game changer. Because then it was like, oh, I see how it served. And because I now see how I developed that program, I see that I can let go of it. And so I say that to say it was, for me, it was a bit of a flip of a switch where I went from depression into, hey, I'm going to live a life of authenticity. I'm going to live a life of joy. So there was that flip of the switch moment. And for me, it's a continuous process. I continuously come up against those limitations, those beliefs that I used to believe, but now I can see are just the lining of the walls designed to keep me safe. And so now it becomes a process of, "Oh, hello, old friend. I know that voice. Thank you for coming in to protect me, to keep me safe. However, we have new tools, we have new ways of doing things. And so I kindly ask you to step aside, to take a rest. That's where the internal family systems work comes in, doing parts work, really speaking to those individual parts of myself to say, I love you, I see you, and I'm asking you to step aside so that other parts of me, the more resilient, the stronger, the more authentic parts can actually step forward and take the lead."
Wow. And that's a really beautiful story there and a beautiful experience to go from dark to deep dark and then into light. And so when you speak of that deep darkness, I have to ask because you shared earlier that you experienced trigger warning here, you experienced suicidal ideations. Did you ever attempt suicide?
Not seriously. As a teenager, when I was only experiencing what I now know as dysthymia, I didn't have a name for it then. I did attempt, not seriously, but I would say those were more a plea, a cry for help and for attention. But because I lost a dear friend to suicide, I think that is what kept me from taking the ideation any further.
So from a teenage to adulthood, suicidal ideations throughout your life here. When do you feel like was the last time you experienced any of those suicidal ideations?
December of 2023. It was a very visceral moment, so I can definitely pinpoint. Now I'll say that what's really interesting is that was the last time I really experienced, like, seriously considering it, and since then, in moments of darkness, the intrusive thoughts have come in because I don't think we can always control our intrusive thoughts. But I'm grateful to say that now when the intrusive thoughts come in, I recognize them for what they are and I remember, oh, we don't have to believe our thoughts because our thoughts aren't necessarily fact, even though they happen inside of our head. So now I can see the thoughts and I understand where it comes from, but I don't give it power.
And thank you for answering and show that's exactly what I teach. And so you just showed exactly what I teach to the folks that I work with. You know, we have at the core of it all, we are a human being first and foremost, and we are biologically wired to think and feel. We can't escape them. We can't escape those feelings. They are naturally wired into our genetic makeup, into our physical self. And so we're going to have thought processes. And I use this as a joke, and everybody laughs when I do tell them, but I say we're always gonna have thoughts of putting somebody's car on flat, right? That's okay. It doesn't mean I'm a bad person. It doesn't mean I'm a terrible, horrible person. Just means I'm a human being who thinks about this type of stuff, right? And what's most important is not the fact that I have that thought of putting somebody's car on flat. The most important thing is the actions that I take when I have that thought. And so, and then I transition over to suicidal ideations, substance use, and the recovery piece of it is if we lived a life of certain way, whether it be depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, substance use, who is to say that I'm not supposed to have these thoughts a year into recovery, 10 years into recovery? And so you just answered my question beautifully. And that's exactly what I teach.
Yeah, I think it's just really important because our thoughts are, if we think about like neural networks and patterns, if we've had certain thoughts habitually for a very long time, years or even decades, I say those are the neural superhighways in our brain, right? And so it makes sense that it's going to feel easier to travel that superhighway as opposed to traveling down the dark alley that we've never gone down before, right? That can feel intimidating, it can feel scary, but it's not because it's actually scary, it's just because it's unknown, because it's new, it's unfamiliar. And so when we think about, you know, encountering challenging moments, when we become dysregulated in our body and our system, oftentimes, as we know, our prefrontal cortex goes offline. We're not necessarily thinking coherently. It's like we go back into a default mode and we say, oh, shoot, let's go back to that super highway that we know that's familiar. And so we can, I think, create a lot of grace for ourselves in those moments because, to your point, we're human beings, right? This is the nature of things, it's what happens. And we can look at those thoughts and say, okay, I see you. We're traveling down that highway again because it's familiar, because it's known, but we don't need to keep traveling down that highway. We can take an exit ramp and go down a different road.
And that goes back into Charles Darwin. Had to think of his name. But if you think about what he was really teaching about, like, I don't mean that the theory of evolution that says we evolved from apes. I don't know if we evolved from apes or not. I'm not the science person. Maybe we did. Maybe we didn't. I don't know. But if you look at the core principle of what Charles Darwin was teaching, right? It goes back into adaptation. It goes back into growth. It goes back into change. And when we go into an area of that is unfamiliar to us, well, what's going to happen? And I am of the belief that we are the only species on the planet that can think 10 years into the future. And if you ask me right now, where do I see myself at in 5 years? I'm going to tell you straight up 100%. Oh, I see myself zombie apocalypse, bridges collapsing, buildings falling down, cars on the highway, because we're the only species who could think 5 years into the future and just take it for a whole nother level. We start getting fearful, anxiety, depressed. I mean, I start hearing voices. I mean, it's like schizophrenia, schizoaffective on a whole new level here. You're probably going to want to put me on a psychiatric unit for a few days. But reality is it's okay to have feelings and thoughts and emotions, and it's okay to experience something new. It's going to be new, going to be a fearful because I don't know. I don't know. We are comfortable when we can predict, and when we cannot predict, we are uncomfortable because we don't know. How can we
Exactly.
know something that hasn't happened yet?
Exactly. And so our brain says, just keep doing what we've been doing because the devil you know is better than the devil you don't, right? But I think you spoke so beautifully to our brains being wired to adaptation, regardless of your belief of how we got here, right? Our brains are wired for adaptation. And so in early childhood, if we had a lot of experiences that taught us to adapt to our environment, we must abandon parts of ourselves. We must push a lot of who we are into the shadow. We must, abandon that. Then it makes sense that we grow into adults who are feeling depression, anxiety, all kinds of different struggles because there's all these parts of us that want to come out and play, that want to be seen, want to be loved. At our core, we want to be seen and loved. And so when we think about, this is something that I think a lot about in my own experience. I think about those experiences I had as a child where I felt that I was being taught I couldn't be myself because I wouldn't belong, I wouldn't be worthy, I wouldn't find love. And so by adopting those programs, I became the adult who kept judging myself, who kept telling myself I wasn't worthy, who kept telling myself I wasn't lovable. And so, if that's ultimately what we want is to be seen and loved, that's where I think for me, taking my power back was not waiting for somebody outside of me to tell me I was lovable or worthy, because when I'm wired to believe that I'm not those things, it wouldn't matter, Kevin, how much you told me I was lovable and worthy. If I'm filtering that through the lens of, no, I'm not, you're wrong, you don't know, you don't see me, then it's never going to permeate, it's never going to land. And so that's a way for us to take back our power, is to say, I know me better than anybody else can ever know me. And if I can start meeting those parts of me with love, with compassion, with grace, if I can start inviting them out of the shadows and into the light, then I can do that work of loving myself, of reparenting myself, of really truly seeing my unique, authentic beauty. And I believe we all have the power to do that for ourselves. And there's no amount of external validation that's going to get us there until we start looking inward and feeling that for ourselves. Because, like you said, we're here to think and feel. And I think we also live in a culture that teaches us that we can think our way around feeling, that we don't actually have to feel those things. We can just think our way through everything. And that has been a huge lesson for me, to learn how to drop into my body, to feel that pain that I pushed down, that I didn't want to feel, to feel that and to know it's not going to break me, it's not going to kill me, to feel that pain. That has made me feel so strong and so resilient. And so now, if I feel some amount of discomfort, I know that's okay. It's okay to be uncomfortable. The discomfort is the data that I need to tell me which direction to move next.
Absolutely. You are 1,000% correct. And that's the one thing I help patients see is everything that we feel is informing us of what decisions to make, where we need to go. And it's about just allowing ourselves to experience the experience itself. It's all in the experience. And, for guys, we're taught, I think Claudia Black says it. She's a the researcher or practitioner clinician that came up with the idea of the rules: don't talk, don't tell, don't feel, all of those things, don't trust. And so for guys, I remember growing up hearing, oh well, men don't cry, and it's like, yeah. And so now when I hear those things, it's like, since when? I mean, according to Dr. Paul Ekman, my favorite psychologist here, okay, one of my favorite, Dr. Paul Ekman, he is a leading emotion psychologist, and he taught that, well, before he did his research, there was two competing theories. That one of them was emotions are not universal, the other one was emotions are universal. And I'm sure there's some different types of finite details I'm leaving out there. So he did his research in Papua New Guinea with a very tribal area, and he found out during in his research that there are 7 universal emotions that are universally expressed, right? And that we're all, doesn't matter what country, what age, what gender, what race, what ethnicity, anything of that sort, we're all going to experience them. And so it's about allowing ourselves at the basic foundation of life, is allowing ourselves to have an experience and not always running from an experience. I can run from an experience all day. I said this the other day to a in group therapy. I said, I can take off right now and go to China, Israel, Russia, Ukraine, Florida, California, Mexico, Nicaragua, it doesn't matter. You name it, I can take a board plane and go there. And what's going to be there when I get there? I'm going to be there. Rather than run from life and run from experiences, why not allow myself to experience? And when I'm anxious, 100%. I'm going to allow I'm going to sit back, as you said, and I'm going to just question, why am I feeling this? How come I'm feeling this? What is this anxiety teaching me? What is it wanting me to do? I'm going to go and I'm going to just do that self-reflection and figure it out.
Exactly. Because if you think about it, our brains are pretty lazy. regardless of again how you think we got here, if you look back at early humans and kind of that hunter gatherer society, energy was scarce. We didn't have, McDonald's or food, around every single corner. And so our bodies learned to conserve energy. And so that's where I say there's nothing that's a waste, right? If we're feeling anxiety, if we're feeling something, it is telling us something because it uses a lot of energy in our body and our brain to be spinning, to be ruminating on a particular story or something. And so that's where it can be really hard for us to know what it's trying to tell us, what it's inviting us into. And that's where I think getting support through therapy, through counseling, through whatever it is, coaching, having someone who can really mirror things to you in a new and different way to kind of help shift your perspective so you can get out of the ruts that you've been in thinking. But that's something that I think is so valuable is to realize nothing is wasted. Our bodies and our brains don't come up with these emotions just for the heck of it because they want to conserve energy. And so I like to think of myself as like a Sherlock Holmes detective, it's like, ooh, okay, here's anxiety. What am I feeling anxiety about? Here's a difficult emotion. Even those old stories that still come up to play sometimes. I'm not good enough, I'm not competent, whatever it is. I pause and instead of judging it, instead of getting frustrated that I'm thinking it or feeling it again, I go, okay, well, where is this coming from? And why am I feeling it? What is this trying to tell me? Because something that I think is really interesting is we often think that our brains are communicating and sending signals down to our body. But I'm sure you know this, when it comes to the brain body connection, it's actually 80% of the information comes from our body to our brain, not the other way around. And if we haven't learned how to read the signals of our body, how to feel our emotions or lean into our intuition, to me, it's the equivalent of taking high school Spanish and then going to a Spanish speaking country and trying to get around. You might catch a word here and there, but you're really largely not going to understand the language. And so that's where I think learning to speak the language of our body, I don't get all the signals correct. I'm still working to be fluent in the language of my body. But when I think back to the years I spent not listening, just thinking top down, my body should just respond to whatever is coming down from my brain, I missed out on a lot of information. And so that curiosity of how do I learn the language of my body rather than being in the equivalent of high school Spanish and trying to have a whole conversation with someone in Spanish, how do I actually practice learning that language so that I can converse and I can read those signals better? Because our body's always trying to talk to us and communicate with us.
You're absolutely right. Absolutely, personally, clinically, professionally agree with you on this. You mentioned something, and I have to say it because if I don't, I'm going to forget it. Well, back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, you could buy uh, a Ford. You can buy any color you wanted as long as it was black. I had to say that. I'm sorry. That's where my brain went as you started talking. I'm like, I have to tell her this. I have to. So you said a lot of great stuff there, and I love the fact that we are talking about emotions because on a global scale, I think that that's really what we're missing all the way around is learning to listen to ourselves, learning to listen to our innermost selves. Now, I did have a patient challenge me on something one time, and so I've had to kind of correct a little bit. There are those who are incapable of doing that, and there are reasons for that. Severity of diagnoses, there are many different reasons. But as long as we are humanly capable of it, I think that's the task. I think that's the challenge is to learn how to listen to ourselves. Our bodies know what it likes and what it doesn't like. And it's just that basic simple idea. And it is the most important form of communication that we could have with any relationship in any relationship.
100%. I like to say, like, we can only love others to the extent that we love ourselves. We can only know others to the extent that we know ourselves. And again, that's where I think it comes back to good intentions of our parents, our upbringing. We talk a lot in the mental health field about childhood trauma and adverse childhood experiences. And there are a lot of really hard experiences. So I don't want to dismiss that, but I want to put it aside for a second and talk about those really well intentioned programs or stories that we get. So, one that like to use as an example is even the idea of our caregivers telling us to finish what's on our plate. If we in our bodies sensed, oh, I'm full, I don't want to keep eating, or I don't like this food, but somebody outside of us told us we had to finish it in order to get up from the dinner table or whatever it is. Again, the well intention there is, I want you to be nourished, I want you to be well fed, but it becomes a subtle way of telling us I can't trust the signals coming from my body. I need to trust the source that's outside of me. And so as we continue to get story after story like that, no, don't trust what you're feeling. I actually love that quote. You can have any color you want as long as it's black. I feel like that's a lot of the story that we get. You can be anything you want in this world as long as it's one of these three things or one of these five things. And so we learn to distrust the signals from our body. We learn to distrust our intrinsic desires, our authentic desires. And so I actually think that's a really important message because that's been incredibly healing for me is to intentionally work on my self trust, trusting that I have the tools, trusting I have the awareness, the capability, the strength, the resilience. I have everything that I need in order to respond to the world around me. And that is what allows me to be present in that experience, like you were talking about, to have the experience, to be in it. Because one of my coping mechanisms was to project myself into the future, try to anticipate everything that's going to happen, because then I'll be prepared for it and I'll know what to do. I can let go of that projection into the future and be more present because I now trust that whatever comes my way, I'll be able to figure it out in the moment. So, a lot of these mechanisms that we've developed to ruminate on the past or project into the future are all keeping us from this present moment because ultimately we don't trust that we can handle, we can't feel it, we won't know what to do with it, whatever the story might be that keeps us from being present. And I think that's the power is dismantling all the defenses that keep us from being present in the moment to moment experience.
I couldn't agree more. Another funny experience. You were talking about how we learn these things from those around us and how it's just this black or white world and there's no gray. I remember Hurricane Floyd came through and I don't even remember what year it was. I think it was 99. And I'm sitting there. My mom sends us to these people's house. I'm not going to say their name just out of respect, but they cooked up listen, I'm from North Carolina and I'm from the backwoods. Okay. So I just want to preface that. And they cooked up some chicken gizzards and livers and everything else in that little pot. And they gave us all the bowl. And this is all you're getting for dinner. I took a half a bite and spit it out, and I went to bed hungry. And I sat there at that kitchen table for a good hour, just staring, just straight staring. I mean, I didn't even break eye contact with the bowl. To me, my body, as we've been talking about, doesn't like it. It was absolutely disgusting. And so I'm glad, so greatly glad that we've been able to talk about this conversation. I would like to switch gears a little bit because I think it's a very hot topic too, especially within the gender culture, right? If that's okay with you.
Absolutely. Let's go for the ride.
I love it. I love it. You said you're an entrepreneur times two. Now, I'm gonna read some stats off to you, and I want your feedback on what your experience has been. And then plus, I want to know what you do. I want to get more in depth with that too, just for the audience. All right, as of 2025, current estimated figures. For the share of entrepreneurs, men are 58.5%, women 41.5%. Non-employer business ownership, 57.3% men, 42.7% female. Startup rates between 2019 and 2020, they were 6.4% higher for men than women. Owned businesses, majority ownership in 2022. For men, it was 54%. For women, it was 39%. Growth trends. for current is higher access to is 70% plus of angel investors are men, 12 to 28% of high growth startups, less than 30% of angel investors. And so that's current stats as far as like entrepreneurship. Now, when you have, and I don't know how old you are, I'm not going to ask you to age yourself on here. So, age groups for entrepreneurship, average age is 44. And it, of course, it varies by demographics. White males average 45, white females average 44. 20 to 30 years of age is 6%. That's the least common group. 30 to 40 years, that's the overall, that's the approximated 30%, and they are considered to be mid-career starters. And then 40 plus years is 64%. And that's the dominant group reflecting accumulated resources. Now, I've got those stats from AI. I get asked AI to give me those stats. And so I share those stats because I want your experience with it. Was it difficult coming from a female perspective? And what were some of your challenges as far as like being a female in a male dominated field?
Thank you for those stats. Yeah, I think so I'll say I've spent most of my career in a male dominated field. My background is actually in engineering, so I've been very familiar with being one or two females in a room full of men. I think that's a lot of what kept me really embodied in my masculine, like I talked about earlier. This is how I fit in. I may not look the part, but I can fit the part. But I will share, not just as an entrepreneur, but even in the corporate sector, have definitely received a lot of the feedback, that I'm aggressive, I'm too much, you know, not nice enough, not soft enough. But just like many other women before me have shared, I think that when it comes to not just women, but I think really everybody in this cultural conditioning, we receive the message that whoever we are is not good enough. We're either too much or not enough. And trying to find that tightrope of perfection that we're expected to walk is really, really difficult. And so, yeah, I would say there are a lot of things about me that challenge the status quo, especially as a female entrepreneur. One of which is the fact that I'm a female, but I go much further in challenging the status quo. I'll share, something that I'm doing, excuse me, is I'm not working 80 hours a week. And if you go to Silicon Valley or the Bay Area, where a lot of angel investors and venture capitalists live, it's really interesting to notice the desire for these disruptive, new ideas, but how to make that idea successful. There's a very small window or formula for what that looks like. So the expectation is that the idea is disruptive, but you need to be working 80 hours a week. You need to be completely committed and not have any distractions. Otherwise, this idea won't work. There's a strong sense of urgency that we have in our culture as well, that we have to do it right now. And so, yeah, there are a lot of things that I'm challenging when it comes to my startups. So I'll share briefly. One of them is an AI video game. So in the tech field, I do have a male co-founder who's my technical co-founder, and I think that that helps somewhat. And because I'm learning, and I say learning, I'm not done learning. It's a constant process for me. But because I'm learning what it means to be unapologetically authentic, I'm not trying to fit in the way that I used to. I'm not trying to put on a mask to look a certain way or behave a certain way or check certain boxes. I really know now that I'm not for everyone. Some people are going to love me, some people are going to hate me, and that's none of my business, really, when it comes down to it. What is my business is to make sure that I'm doing what feels aligned. I'm doing what feels authentic. I'm honoring the different parts of me that want to be expressed rather than prioritizing someone else's comfort or desire outside of me. And if that leads to an outcome where I get funded by a venture capitalist, great. And if it leads to an outcome where I don't get funded, great. Because for me, it's not about the outcome, it is about the experience, it's about the journey, and it's about being present with myself every single moment. That's the long-winded way of saying yes, there have been a lot of challenges, and I'm sure I will continue to face challenges. But at the end of the day, I'm here for the journey, not the destination. So as long as, we think about, oh, I want to create a future where I'm happy, I'm successful, I'm joyful, I'm safe, I'm all of those things. But if we're not being that in the current moment, there's no way for us to create a future that looks like that. There's no way for me to take actions that are motivated by fear of rejection, fear of a particular outcome. If I act out of fear, then I'm going to create a future that's filled with fear. But if I act from a place of love, of joy, of authenticity, then I'm much more likely to create a future that looks and feels that way.
I love it. Now I have to ask, you said AI video game. This is more on a personal level versus an audience level, but I'm not gonna edit it out because I'm not gonna edit it out, right? But please tell me it's going to be for Sony PlayStation 5 or
It
4
is
or 6.
not. It is not actually.
Man,
Because it's an AI video game, a lot of the video game companies these days are prioritizing the high compute devices, especially when it comes to AI, because there's a lot that goes into making AI work on a device. So we're actually prioritizing low compute devices. So we're targeting iOS. We'll probably be on Steam as well. So you can definitely find us on Steam. But right now we're prioritizing iPhones 13 or older, or newer, rather.
oh, shucks. That sucks. I wish you
But
woulda
who
said
knows? When this blows up and we get a deal with Nintendo or whoever, then I'm sure we'll be on other platforms.
well, I hope it is a very successful project for you, and
Thank
definitely if
you.
you start getting into the gaming industry as far as, like, which platform, you have to do Sony, okay? Like, there's no ands, ifs, or buts. You have to do Sony.
Got it. Okay, I'll tell our investors. Kevin said we have to do Sony, so we've got to do it.
Absolutely. I mean, I can vibe with the iOS. I can vibe with that. Let me just show you. Okay. And then and I'm not editing none of this out.
Okay, so you'll be able to play. It's called Astra Puffs, by the way, so stay tuned for it. We haven't launched yet, but we're getting close.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to it. I am looking forward to, when it launches. And of course, when it does launch, we need to do another interview for sure. 100%. We have to get you back on here so we can do another interview.
I would love that.
Absolutely.
Let's do it.
Absolutely. So listen, we're coming down to the end of the wire here. We've talked about a lot from entrepreneurship to cultural ideologies, societal ideologies, gender, self-esteem, self-growth, self-worth, depression, suicidal ideations. We've talked about childhood traumas, and I know we didn't go in the weeds within the trauma area. I don't want to unpack anything I can't close, and clinically, unless you're in North Carolina, can't legally work with you. Out of everything we've talked about, if there's, I'm gonna ask you three questions, the most important questions you're ever going to be asked today. If there's one thing you want somebody to take away from this, what would you want that to be?
That you are here for a reason, that you are magical and beautiful and unique. And any of the voices in your head, any of the beliefs that try to convince you of something different, even though they might be very, very loud voices and they might have been there for a very long time, please know that that is not you speaking. Those are learned programs, those are learned stories. And the quicker you get to dismantling those, the quicker you can really connect to and feel that unique magic and beauty and love, and you can live into the purpose that you're here on this planet for.
Beautiful, beautiful. What would be your call to action for people?
My call to action would be, especially if you're stuck in a rut, if you're feeling like you're stuck in a rut, it would be do something different. I love the phrase, if nothing changes, nothing changes. And so even if let's say, you've been seeing a talk therapist, right? And that's not necessarily giving you the results that you want, try a different modality of therapy. I've done EMDR, I've done talk therapy, I've done cognitive behavioral therapy, I've done all kinds of different therapies, I've done coaching, I've done psychedelic assisted journeys, I've done all kinds of things. I've done exercise, physical exercise, and yoga as a method of healing. I've tapped into spirituality. So there are all these different modalities that can serve us. So if you're feeling stuck in a rut, I would say try something different, try something new, and you never know what might be unlocked.
I love it. And if anybody wanted to reach out to you, maybe have you speak, maybe even for some mentoring, some consulting, contracting, anything related to what you do, how would they reach you?
Yeah, so I would say email these days is probably the best actually because I am on social media, but I'm not checking it all of the time. But carissa.carbon@gmail.com. I'm sure we can put that in the notes for the show. But you can find me on Instagram at wild underscore moss underscore. Girl moss is sort of my theme. So I'm reintegrating into the earth. So you can find me at wild moss. You can find astrapuffs.com for the video game. Healcollective.me is my other startup. I'm not hard to find. So please reach out, whether it's, like you said, whether it's a speaking engagement, consulting, mentoring, or even just an ear to listen to your story, to however I can support you on your journey, please reach out.
Absolutely. And listen, more than welcome anytime to come back. Thank you for your humorous story in certain areas, humbling story, sad story. Thank you for being willing to share your experience and to break stigmas around mental health, substance use, suicide awareness. Thank you.
Kevin, thank you so much for the opportunity, for your questions, your curiosity. Thank you for sharing your voice and doing this really important work in the world because we need more people talking, we need more people sharing and helping us all realize that we're not alone. So thank you.